Arizona Territory, 1889. The Santa Fe Railroad Station in Tucson stood like a lonely sentinel against the desert sky, its wooden platform weathered by years of scorching sun and bitter winds. Steam hissed from the massive locomotive as passengers hurried past with their carpetbags and traveling cases, most eager to reach their destinations before the unforgiving desert night fell upon them. But one figure remained, motionless on the platform long after the others had dispersed. A young woman in a torn blue dress, sobbing into her hands as if her very soul was breaking apart. She sat on a wooden bench beneath the station's overhang, her shoulders shaking with each desperate breath, completely alone in a world that seemed to have abandoned her. What she didn't know was that watching her from the shadows of the freight building stood a man whose own heart had been shattered so many times, he'd forgotten what it felt like to care about another human being. A man whose name was whispered in saloons from California to Texas, whose reputation was built on violence and whose future seemed destined for nothing but darkness. This is the story of how two broken souls found each other in the most unlikely place, and how sometimes the greatest act of love begins with a single moment of kindness between strangers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The man's name was Cole Brennan, though most folks who knew that name crossed themselves and looked the other way when they heard it spoken. At 28, he carried himself with the careful grace of someone who'd learned that survival meant always being ready for trouble. His dark hair hung past his collar, and 3 days of stubble covered a jaw that had been broken twice in saloon fights. But it was his eyes that told the real story, gray as storm clouds and holding the kind of emptiness that comes from seeing too much death and causing too much pain. Cole had been in Tucson for 2 days, laying low after a job in Phoenix that had gone sideways. The bank robbery was supposed to be simple: get in, get the money, get out. But the new sheriff had been smarter than expected, and Cole's partner Dutch had taken a bullet in the shoulder during their escape. They'd made it out with barely $300 between them, and Dutch was holed up in a boarding house on the wrong side of town, fevering and cursing Cole's name. The smart thing would have been to ride out immediately, put as much distance as possible between himself and Arizona law. Cole's horse was saddled and waiting in the livery stable, his saddlebags packed with what little he owned in this world: a change of clothes, ammunition for his Colt .45, and a worn leather journal that contained the names and locations of every person who'd ever wronged him. He'd been planning to head for Mexico, maybe try to disappear into the hills of Sonora where American law couldn't follow. But something had kept him in town, some restless feeling he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the letter he'd received 3 weeks ago, forwarded through a network of contacts and saloon keepers who knew how to find men like him. The letter bore his sister's handwriting, the first word he'd had from family in over 5 years. Cole. It had read in Margaret's careful script: I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I had to write. Pa died last month. Consumption. Finally got him. His last words were about you. He said he was sorry for what he'd done. Sorry he drove you away. There's a place for you here in Kansas if you want it. I've got a little farm with my husband Robert, and we could use the help. I know you've been running for a long time, but maybe it's time to come home. Your loving sister, Maggie. Cole had read that letter a dozen times, each reading bringing back memories he'd tried to bury. Memories of the man who'd beaten him bloody for stealing apples when he was 8. The man who'd called him worthless and no account when he'd tried to defend their neighbor's daughter from unwanted advances. The man who'd finally driven him from home at 16 with a shotgun and a promise that if he ever came back, he'd be met with buckshot. But the letter also brought back memories of Maggie, 5 years younger and the only person who'd ever shown him unconditional love. She'd sneak him food when Pa locked him in the root cellar for days. She'd tend his wounds when the beatings got too severe. And when he'd finally left home, she'd cried and begged him not to go, promising things would get better. Things hadn't gotten better. They'd gotten worse, much worse. Cole's first winter on his own had nearly killed him, and he'd learned quickly that a man with no money and no family had limited options in the territories. He'd started small, stealing food, picking pockets, running cons on traveling salesmen. But when you were good with a gun and had nothing left to lose, bigger opportunities presented themselves. His first bank robbery had been in Albuquerque. Partnered with an older outlaw named Frank Morrison, who'd taken pity on a hungry kid with fast hands and dead eyes. Frank had taught him the trade, how to case a bank, how to time the guards, how to disappear into the desert before posses could form. Frank had also taught him that successful outlaws didn't let emotions get in the way of business. The moment you start caring about people, Frank had said over a campfire in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, that's the moment you get yourself killed. This life ain't got room for soft feelings, boy. You remember that. Cole had remembered it through 12 successful jobs and 3 failed ones. He'd remembered it when Frank took a marshal's bullet in the back during a job in Colorado and died calling for his mother. He'd remembered it when his next partner, a Mexican named Santos, betrayed him to bounty hunters for $500. And he'd remembered it 6 months ago when a woman named Catherine Sullivan had claimed to love him, had shared his bed and his secrets, only to discover she was working for the Pinkertons all along. The betrayal had cut deeper than Cole wanted to admit. For 3 weeks, he'd let himself believe that maybe Frank had been wrong, that maybe there was room in an outlaw's life for something more than survival. Catherine had been beautiful and clever, claiming to be a widow traveling west to start a new life. She'd listened to his stories without judgment, had touched his scars with gentle fingers, had whispered promises in the darkness that made him dare to dream of redemption. But it had all been a lie, an elaborate trap designed to bring down the Brennan gang. The only reason Cole was still alive was because Dutch had spotted the Pinkertons moving into position outside their hotel in Denver. They'd shot their way out, leaving 3 dead lawmen behind and Catherine screaming Cole's name as he rode away. Since then, Cole had been exactly what Frank Morrison had tried to make him, a man without attachments, without weaknesses, without hope. He took what he needed, trusted no one, and moved through the territories like a ghost, leaving nothing behind but wanted posters and broken dreams. So what was he doing standing in the shadows of a train station, watching a stranger cry? The girl couldn't have been more than 20, with auburn hair that caught the last rays of sunlight, and a face that reminded him painfully of his sister at that age. Her dress was well made but travel-stained, and he could see a torn seam along the shoulder that suggested recent rough handling. A small carpet bag sat beside her on the bench, its contents apparently everything she owned in the world. Cole told himself to walk away. Whatever trouble this girl was in, it wasn't his concern. He had his own problems. Dutch's fever was getting worse, and every hour they stayed in Tucson increased the chances of discovery. The smart play was to take his horse and ride, leave Dutch to whatever fate awaited him, and put the desert between himself and any pursuing lawmen. But something about the girl's crying stopped him cold. It wasn't the dramatic sobbing of someone seeking attention or the angry tears of someone wronged. This was the sound of genuine despair, the kind of grief that came from losing everything that mattered. Cole recognized it because he'd heard it in his own voice too many times to count. As he watched, an older man approached the bench where the girl sat. Cole's hand instinctively moved to his gun when he saw the man's predatory smile, and the way his eyes roamed over the girl's figure. The stranger was well dressed in a brown suit and bowler hat, but there was something oily about his manner that set Cole's teeth on edge. "Excuse me, miss," the man said, his voice carrying easily across the platform. "I couldn't help but notice you seemed to be in some distress. Perhaps I could be of assistance?" The girl looked up, hope flickering briefly in her tear-swollen eyes. I'm waiting for my uncle, sir." He was supposed to meet me here, but he hasn't come," the man finished smoothly. "How unfortunate. These frontier towns can be so unreliable. Tell me, do you have anywhere to stay tonight?" Cole saw the trap being laid and felt his jaw clench. The girl was clearly innocent, probably fresh from back east and unprepared for the harsh realities of territorial life. She was exactly the kind of prey that men like the stranger specialized in, young, alone, and desperate. "No, sir," the girl stammered. "I was hoping Uncle Thomas would, but I suppose I could find a hotel." "Oh, my dear child," the man said, moving closer to the bench. "I'm afraid decent accommodations are quite expensive in Tucson. But I happen to know of a very respectable boarding house where a young lady such as yourself could stay safely. For a very reasonable price, of course." Cole had heard enough. He knew exactly what kind of boarding house the man was describing. And he knew what would happen to an innocent girl who trusted such an offer. 6 months ago, he would have walked away. One more tragedy in a world full of them wasn't his responsibility. But something about this girl, something about her genuine helplessness and the way she reminded him of Maggie, made walking away impossible. Before he could think better of it, Cole stepped out of the shadows and into the lamplight of the platform. His spurs rang against the wooden planks as he approached, and both the girl and the stranger turned to look at him. Cole saw the man's expression change, instantly from predatory confidence to wary calculation, clearly recognizing danger when he saw it. "Evening," Cole said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that had ended more than one saloon disagreement. His coat was pushed back slightly, revealing the gun at his hip in what might have been a casual gesture. "Couldn't help but overhear. This young lady seems to be having some trouble." The stranger's smile faltered, but he maintained his composure. "Just trying to be neighborly, friend. The young miss here needs a place to stay, and I was offering to help." "That's real Christian of you," Cole said, not taking his eyes off the man. "But I think the lady might prefer to make her own arrangements. Don't you agree?" The threat in Cole's voice was unmistakable, and the stranger was clearly experienced enough in reading dangerous men to recognize when he was outmatched. Of course," he said, backing away from the bench. "Just trying to help, no offense intended." He tipped his hat to the girl and hurried away into the gathering darkness, glancing back once with an expression that promised this wasn't over. Cole watched him go until he was certain the threat had passed, then turned his attention to the girl, who was staring up at him with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying the refined accent of someone educated back east. I think you may have saved me from making a terrible mistake." Cole studied her face in the lamplight, noting the intelligence in her green eyes despite her obvious distress. She was beautiful, he realized with an uncomfortable jolt, not just pretty, but truly beautiful in a way that reminded him why men started wars and wrote poetry. Her auburn hair was partially escaped from its pins, framing a face that belonged in a painting rather than on a dusty train platform in Arizona territory. "That man wasn't offering you any kind of help you'd want to accept," Cole said, surprised by the gentleness in his own voice. "What's your situation here? You said you were waiting for your uncle?" The girl's composure crumbled again, and fresh tears started down her cheeks. "Uncle Thomas was supposed to meet me. I've been traveling for 4 days from Philadelphia, and this was supposed to be my new home. But he never came. I've been waiting since this morning." Cole felt something twist in his chest at the genuine heartbreak in her voice. "What's your name?" "Emily," she said, then seemed to remember her manners despite her distress. "Emily Catherine Morrison. And you are ... Cole hesitated. Giving his real name to a stranger was dangerous, but something about Emily's honest face made lying feel wrong. "Cole," he said finally. "Cole Brennan." If the name meant anything to her, she didn't show it. Most proper Eastern ladies wouldn't. Know the names of Western outlaws anyway. Mr. Brennan, I don't know what to do. I have very little money, and I don't know anyone in this town. Uncle Thomas was my only family left after my parents died, and now. She didn't finish the sentence. But Cole could fill in the blanks. Another orphan, another person abandoned by the world and left to survive on their own. The story was as old as the territories themselves. How much money do you have? Cole asked, then quickly added, I'm not planning to rob you. I'm trying to figure out your options. Emily looked embarrassed but reached into her reticule and pulled out a small purse. $17, she said. It was supposed to last until I could find work, but Uncle Thomas was going to help me ... $17 wouldn't last a week in a town like Tucson, and they both knew it. Cole found himself calculating rapidly the cost of a decent hotel. Room, meals, maybe stage fare to somewhere safer. It would take at least $50 to give Emily any real chance of getting back on her feet. The smart thing to do was walk away. Point her toward the church, maybe, or the sheriff's office. Let someone else deal with the problem of one more lost soul in the territories. Cole had his own troubles, his own survival to worry about. He'd already done more than most men would by running off the predator in the brown suit. But as Emily looked up at him with those hopeful green eyes, Cole found himself thinking about Maggie's letter again. About second chances and redemption. And the possibility that maybe, just maybe, a man could change his stars if he was willing to take the right risks. Come on, Cole said, making a decision that he knew would probably get him killed. Let's get you someplace safe for the night. We can figure out the rest in the morning. Emily's face lit up with relief and gratitude that hit Cole like a physical blow. It had been so long since anyone had looked at him like that, like he was a hero instead of a villain, like he was someone worth trusting instead of someone to fear. As they walked toward the better part of town, Emily's carpetbag in Cole's hand and her presence warm beside him in the desert evening. Cole wondered if this was how redemption began, not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with a simple choice to help a stranger in need. Didn't know yet that Emily Morrison would teach him what love really meant, or that their meeting on this dusty platform would change both their lives forever. All he knew was that for the first time in years, he was doing something that felt right instead of just expedient, and maybe, Cole thought as they walked through the gathering darkness toward an uncertain future, maybe that was enough to start with. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Grand Palace Hotel wasn't particularly grand, but it was the cleanest establishment in Tucson that would accept an unaccompanied woman without asking too many questions. Cole approached the front desk with Emily beside him, acutely aware of how they must look together, a rough-edged drifter and a refined Eastern lady. The desk clerk, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, looked them over with barely concealed suspicion. We need 2 rooms, Cole said, placing $20 on the polished wood counter. The lady requires accommodation for an indefinite stay. The clerk's eyebrows rose as he examined the money. 2 rooms will be $4 per night, meals extra. How long will you be staying? Just tonight for me, Cole replied. The lady's circumstances are still being determined. Emily stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tears that had dried on her cheeks. Sir, I should mention that I'm expecting my Uncle Thomas Morrison to arrive soon. He may come looking for me. The clerk's expression shifted slightly, recognition flickering in his eyes. Thomas Morrison? Ma'am, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Thomas Morrison passed away 2 weeks ago. Consumption took him sudden-like. The whole town attended his funeral. Emily's face went white, and Cole instinctively steadied her with a hand on her elbow. The final piece of her support system had just crumbled away, leaving her truly alone in the world. Cole felt her trembling and recognized the shock he'd experienced that same sensation when he'd received word of his father's death, even though the old man had driven him away years before. "Are you certain?" Emily whispered, though her voice held no real hope. "Yes, ma'am, I'm real sorry. Thomas was a good man, helped a lot of folks in these parts. Talked about a niece back east sometimes. I reckon that would be you." Cole watched. Emily absorbed this final blow to her carefully constructed plans. In her place, many people would have collapsed, would have given in to despair. Instead, he saw her spine straighten, her chin lift with a determination that surprised him. There was steel beneath that refined exterior, a strength she probably didn't even know she possessed. "I see," Emily said quietly. "Then I suppose I need to make new arrangements rather quickly." The clerk handed over 2 keys with sympathetic efficiency. "Rooms 12 and 14, second floor. There's a dining room attached if you need supper. My condolences about your uncle, miss." As they climbed a narrow staircase, Cole found himself stealing glances at Emily. She moved with grace even in crisis, and there was something about her composure that both impressed and concerned him. In his experience, people who held themselves together too tightly had a tendency to shatter completely when the pressure became too much. At the landing, Cole stopped in front of room 12 and handed Emily the key. "This one's yours. I'll be right next door if you need anything." Emily turned the key in the lock, then paused with her hand on the doorknob. "Mr. Brennan, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll forgive my directness. Ask away." "Why?" "Are you helping me? You don't know me, and it's clear you have your own concerns. Most men would have walked away after dealing with that person on the platform." Cole considered the question, surprised by her perceptiveness. Most people saw what they expected to see: a rough drifter, possibly dangerous, certainly not someone to trust with personal confidences. But Emily was looking at him as if she genuinely wanted to understand his motivations. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be alone in the world," Cole said finally. "And maybe because that man reminded me of every predator I've ever met. And I couldn't stomach the thought of him getting his hands on someone like you. Someone like me. Someone decent. Someone who still believes the world has good people in it." Emily studied his face in the hallway's dim lamplight, and Cole had the uncomfortable sensation that she was seeing more than he intended to reveal. "You speak as if you're not one of those good people." Cole's laugh was harsh and without humor. "Lady, if you knew half the things I've done, you wouldn't be standing here having this conversation with me." "Perhaps," Emily said softly. "But I know what you did tonight, and that tells me something about who you really are, regardless of what you may have done before." Before Cole could respond to that unsettling observation, Emily disappeared into her room, leaving him standing in the hallway with more questions than answers. He'd expected gratitude, maybe tears, possibly even the kind of hero worship that made him uncomfortable. He hadn't expected insight that cut straight to the heart of his own confusion about his motivations. In his own room, Cole sat on the narrow bed and tried to make sense of what he'd gotten himself into. The smart play was still to leave in the morning right out early, maybe leave a few dollars for Emily's continued expenses, and put Arizona territory behind him before his luck ran out. Dutch would probably survive his fever, or he wouldn't, and either way, staying wasn't going to change the outcome. But as Cole cleaned his gun and checked his ammunition, old habits that kept a man alive in dangerous territory, he found his thoughts returning to Emily's face when she'd learned about her uncle's death. That moment of devastation followed by quiet resolution reminded him of something he'd almost forgotten. Courage didn't always come with guns and swagger. Sometimes it was as simple as deciding to keep going when everything seemed hopeless. A soft knock at his door interrupted his brooding. Cole slipped his gun into his holster before answering, though he doubted Emily posed any physical threat. When he opened the door, he found her standing in the hallway with a determined expression and her carpetbag in hand. "I need to speak with You about a business proposition, Emily said without preamble. Cole stepped back to let her enter, noting that she'd changed from her travel-stained dress into something simpler but cleaner. Her hair was pinned back severely, giving her an almost businesslike appearance that would have been amusing if not for the seriousness in her green eyes. "What kind of business?" Cole asked, settling into the room's single chair while Emily perched on the edge of the bed. "I've been thinking about my situation," Emily began, her hands folded carefully in her lap. "I have $17, no family, and apparently no prospects in Tucson. But I also have certain skills that might be valuable in a place like this." "What skills?" "I can read and write, not just basic letters, but proper correspondence. I can do mathematical calculations, keep books, organize records. I speak French and German, and I can teach piano, though I don't suppose there are many pianos in the territories." Cole nodded slowly. "Those are useful skills, but I'm not sure how they help your immediate situation." Emily leaned forward slightly, and Cole caught a glimpse of the determination that had carried her across the country on the promise of a new life. "I've noticed that frontier towns often lack people with formal education. There must be businessmen here who need correspondence written, accounts managed, children tutored. If I could find work, I could support myself." "It's possible," Cole agreed, though he doubted any respectable business would hire a woman without references or connections. "But that still doesn't explain why you're discussing this with me." "Because I need someone to help me navigate this world until I can establish myself." "And you need—" Emily hesitated, as if unsure how to phrase her next words. "You need someone who won't ask questions about your past, but might help you consider your future." Cole stared at her, wondering if Emily Morrison was the most naive woman in the territories or possibly the most perceptive. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A temporary partnership. You help me find legitimate work and keep me safe while I get established. In return, I help you with anything that requires discretion and education, such as—" Emily's cheeks colored slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I may not know much about your line of work, Mr. Brennan, but I suspect there are times when a man in your position might benefit from having someone who can write convincing letters, forge documents, or simply provide the appearance of respectability." Cole felt a chill of recognition. Emily was offering to become his accomplice, though she was too well-bred to use such crude terminology. The proposition was both practical and dangerous. Having an educated woman as a partner could indeed open certain opportunities, but it would also make him responsible for her safety and potentially corrupt someone who still retained her innocence. "You don't know what you're asking," Cole said finally. "The kind of help you're talking about. It could make you a wanted woman. Once you cross certain lines, there's no going back to being respectable." "Mr. Brennan," Emily said, her voice quiet but firm, "respectability is a luxury I can no longer afford. I'm a woman alone with no money and no prospects. In a month, I'll either be dead, working in one of those terrible places that man wanted to take me to, or I'll have found a way to survive on my own terms." Cole recognized the steel in her voice because he'd heard it in his own when he'd made his first, truly desperate choice years ago. Emily Morrison was standing at the same crossroads he'd faced, and she was choosing survival over respectability just as he had. "There's another option," Cole said carefully. "I could give you enough money to get back east, maybe to another relative or friend who could help you start over." Emily shook her head. "There is no one back east. My parents were older when they had me, and their families never approved of their marriage. I have no other relatives, no family friends who would take in a penniless orphan. Besides," she added with a slight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "I came west to start a new life, and that's what I intend to do." Cole studied her face, looking for signs of the desperation that made people make foolish choices. Instead, he saw calculation, determination, and something that reminded him uncomfortably of himself at her age. Emily Morrison wasn't making this proposal out of panic. She was making it out of a clear-eyed assessment of her options and a willingness to do whatever was necessary to survive. "If we were to enter into such an arrangement," Cole said slowly, "there would have to be rules. You'd have to trust my judgment about when situations are too dangerous. And you'd have to accept that there might come a time when I'd have to disappear without warning, leaving you to fend for yourself. I understand, do you? Because once you help me with even one job, you become a criminal in the eyes of the law. There's no halfway point, no way to be a little bit of an outlaw." Emily met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Brennan, I think you underestimate how thoroughly my old life has already been destroyed. I'm not clinging to respectability because I no longer have any to lose." Cole realized that Emily understood the stakes better than he'd given her credit for. She wasn't a naive Eastern lady stumbling into danger. She was a woman who'd already lost everything and was determined to build something new from the ruins, regardless of the cost. "There's one more thing," Cole said. "My partner Dutch is laid up with a fever in a boarding house across town. If we're going to work together, you need to know that my first priority has to be getting him well enough to travel. That might put us both at risk." "What kind of risk?" Cole hesitated, then decided that if Emily was going to be his partner, she deserved the truth. "Dutch and I robbed a bank in Phoenix 3 days ago. There might be a posse following our trail, and every day we stay in one place increases the chance of getting caught." Emily absorbed this information without visible shock, which surprised Cole more than her earlier proposition had. "Are you telling me this to frighten me away from our arrangement?" "I'm telling you because you need to know what you're getting into." Emily was quiet for a long moment, and Cole could almost see her weighing the dangers against her alternatives. When she spoke again, her voice was steady and resolved. "Mr. Brennan, 3 days ago I was a respectable woman with a secure future planned out ahead of me. Today I learned that my last living relative is dead. I'm stranded in a territory I've never seen with no money and no prospects. And the first person who offered me help turned out to be planning something I don't even want to imagine." She stood up, smoothing her skirts with hands that barely trembled. "If you're offering me a chance to survive on my own terms, with my dignity intact and my skills put to use, then I'm willing to accept the risks that come with that choice." Cole found himself admiring Emily's courage, even as he wondered if he was making a terrible mistake. Frank Morrison had warned him about letting emotions cloud his judgment, and here he was contemplating a partnership with a woman who reminded him of everything good he'd lost in his life. But as he looked at Emily Morrison, educated, determined, and utterly alone in the world, Cole realized that maybe Frank had been wrong about some things. Maybe the moment you stopped caring about people wasn't the moment you became truly dangerous. Maybe it was the moment you stopped being truly human. "All right," Cole said, extending his hand to shake on their agreement. "Partners, at least until you get established or until staying together becomes too dangerous for both of us." Emily took his hand, her grip firm and warm. "Partners," she agreed, and Cole wondered if he'd just made the best decision of his life or sealed both their fates. Dawn came early to the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that would have been beautiful if Cole hadn't been lying awake for most of the night questioning his sanity. Through the thin hotel walls, he could hear Emily moving around in the adjacent room, the soft sounds of someone who was used to rising early and facing each day with purpose. It was a stark contrast to Dutch's usual morning routine of cursing the sun, the world, and anyone unfortunate enough to be within earshot. Cole dressed quickly and knocked softly on Emily's door. When she answered, he was surprised to see that she'd managed to transform her simple traveling dress into something that looked almost professional. Her hair was pinned back in a severe style that made her look older and more serious, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that suggested she'd spent the night preparing for battle rather than wallowing in self-pity. "Good morning, Mr. Brennan," Emily said, her voice crisp and businesslike. "I trust you slept well." "Well enough," Cole lied. "You ready to see what we're dealing with?" Emily nodded, picking up a small leather portfolio that Cole hadn't noticed. "The night before. I've made some notes about potential opportunities in town. I also have a few questions about your associate's condition." As they walked through Tucson's early morning streets, Cole found himself reassessing his new partner. In daylight, Emily moved with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested she was used to having important things to do and limited time to do them. She observed everything: the layout of the streets, the types of businesses, the quality of the buildings, with the focused attention of someone gathering intelligence. "Tell me about Dutch," Emily said as they navigated around a freight wagon loaded with mining equipment. "How long have you known him?" "About 2 years. He's a good man to have at your back when things get complicated, but he's got a temper and a taste for whiskey that sometimes gets us into trouble." "And his current medical situation?" Cole glanced at her, noting the clinical way she'd phrased the question. "Bullet wound in the shoulder, infected and fevering. I've been treating it with whiskey and prayer, but it's not getting better." "Whiskey and prayer," Emily repeated, her tone suggesting she found this approach less than optimal. "Has anyone with actual medical training examined him?" "There's a doctor in town, but Dutch is wanted for questioning in connection with some cattle rustling up in New Mexico." Going to a legitimate doctor would be like walking into the sheriff's office and confessing. Emily stopped walking abruptly, her green eyes thoughtful. What if there were a way to get proper medical attention without exposing him to legal complications? "I'm listening. I noticed yesterday that there's a Protestant mission on the edge of town. In my experience, missions often have people with medical training who ask fewer questions than traditional doctors. They're also bound by certain ethical obligations about helping people in need." Cole considered this. He'd avoided churches and missions for years, partly out of a general suspicion of organized religion and partly because he'd never felt welcome in places dedicated to salvation. But Emily might be right about their discretion mission workers. Dealt with all kinds of desperate people and probably had experience keeping confidences. "It's worth trying," Cole admitted. "But first we need to see how bad Dutch is this morning." The boarding house where Dutch was recovering sat on the shabby end of town, wedged between a blacksmith shop and a saloon that never seemed to close. The proprietor, a Mexican woman named Rosa, who asked no questions as long as the rent was paid, nodded to Cole as they entered. "Your friend, he is not so good today," Rosa said in heavily accented English. "The fever, it comes and goes, but mostly it comes." Cole led Emily up the narrow staircase to Dutch's room, pausing outside the door to prepare her for what she was about to see. "Dutch isn't exactly what you'd call refined company, even when he's healthy. Don't take anything he says personally." Dutch Carmichael looked terrible. The big man was sprawled across a narrow bed that was too small for his frame, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the morning chill. His shoulder was wrapped in bandages that were stained with blood and something that looked like infection. And his face had the gray pallor that Cole had learned to associate with serious trouble. "Dutch," Cole said softly, "I brought someone to look at your shoulder." Dutch's eyes opened slowly, struggling to focus. When he saw Emily standing behind Cole, his cracked lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "Well, I'll be damned. Cole Brennan bringing a lady to see me. Must be worse off than I thought." "This is Emily Morrison," Cole said. "She's going to be working with us for a while." "Working with us?" Dutch's voice was weak but incredulous. "Cole, what the hell are you thinking? We can't drag some fancy Eastern lady into our line of work." Emily stepped forward before Cole could respond, her manner completely professional despite the squalid surroundings. "Mr. Carmichael, I'm not here to discuss business arrangements. I'm here because you need medical attention, and I believe I can help you get it without compromising your security." Dutch stared at her for a moment, then started to laugh, a sound that quickly turned into a painful cough. "Lady, I don't know what Cole told you about us, but we ain't exactly the kind of men who go to church socials and mission picnics." "I'm well aware of your circumstances," Emily said calmly. "I'm also aware that you're going to die if that infection isn't properly treated. So you can either listen to my suggestions, or you can lie here and debate the propriety of my involvement while your condition worsens." Cole watched Dutch's expression change as he realized that Emily wasn't some helpless Eastern flower who would faint at the sight of blood. There was steel in her voice and intelligence in her eyes, and Dutch was experienced enough to recognize both. "All right, Miss Morrison," Dutch said finally. "What did you have in mind?" Emily opened her leather portfolio and pulled out a sheet of paper covered with neat handwriting. "There's a Methodist mission about a mile from here that serves the Mexican families and transient workers. They have a medical clinic that operates 3 days a week, staffed by a retired Army surgeon named Dr. Samuel Wright. And you think this doctor will treat a wanted man without asking questions? I think Dr. Wright will treat a patient who needs help, especially if that patient comes to him through proper channels." Emily glanced at Cole, then back at Dutch. "I'm proposing to visit the mission this morning as a concerned citizen, seeking help for a friend who was injured in a mining accident. Dr. Wright can assess the situation and provide proper medical care without anyone needing to know the actual details of how you were injured." Dutch looked skeptical. "What makes you think he'll go along with such a story?" "Because it's not entirely a lie," Emily said smoothly. "You were injured while working, and you do need medical attention. The specific nature of your work is simply not relevant to your current medical needs." Cole found himself impressed by Emily's reasoning. She wasn't suggesting an elaborate deception, just a careful omission of certain details. It was exactly the kind of thinking that made the difference between successful outlaws and dead ones. "There's one problem," Cole said. "Dutch can't exactly walk into a mission clinic. He's too recognizable, and he can barely stand up. Which is why Dr. Wright would need to make a house call," Emily replied. "Mission doctors are accustomed to treating patients who can't come to them. If I explain that my friend is too ill to travel, I'm confident Dr. Wright will agree to visit him here." Dutch was quiet for a long moment, studying Emily's face. "Why are you doing this? Cole said you just met yesterday." Emily's expression softened slightly. "Because everyone deserves medical care when they're suffering, regardless of their past mistakes. And because Cole helped me when I had nowhere else to turn. And what do you want in return?" "I want to prove that I can be useful to your partnership. I want to demonstrate that education and respectability can be tools just like any others, and sometimes they're more effective than violence." Dutch looked at Cole with an expression that suggested he thought his partner had lost his mind. "Cole, are you sure about this? Taking on a female partner is complicated enough without her being the reforming type." "I'm not trying to reform anyone," Emily said before Cole could answer. "I'm trying to survive, and I believe we can help each other do that more effectively than any of us could manage alone." Cole saw something pass between Dutch and Emily in that moment, a recognition of shared pragmatism that surprised him. Dutch was many things, but he wasn't stupid, and he could clearly see that Emily's proposal made practical sense. "All right," Dutch said finally. "Let's try your missionary doctor. But if this goes wrong, if we end up in jail because of your plan, I'm holding you personally responsible." "Understood," Emily said, closing her portfolio with a crisp snap. "I'll go to the mission immediately and return with Dr. Wright as soon as possible." After Emily left, Cole sat in the room's single chair while Dutch dozed fitfully. The boarding house was quiet except for the distant sounds of the street and the occasional groan from his partner. Cole found himself thinking about Emily's confident manner and the way she'd handled Dutch's suspicion. Most people were intimidated by Dutch even when he was healthy. The man had a reputation for violence that was well earned. But Emily had treated him like any other patient who needed help, And somehow that approach had been more effective than any amount of social maneuvering. "You're thinking awful hard over there," Dutch said without opening his eyes. "Just wondering if we're making a mistake." "Which part? Taking on a female partner or trusting her to handle our medical problems?" Cole considered the question. "Both." "Maybe." Dutch was quiet for a moment. "You know what I think? I think you're scared." "Of what?" "Of the possibility that she might actually be as useful as she claims. Because if she is, it means we might have to start thinking about what we're doing instead of just reacting to whatever comes next." Cole knew Dutch was right, though he wasn't ready to admit it out loud. Emily's presence forced him to consider possibilities. He'd stopped thinking about years ago, the possibility of planning for the future instead of just surviving each day. The possibility of using intelligence instead of just brute force. The possibility of working with someone who brought different skills to their partnership. An hour later, Emily returned with a middle-aged man in a black suit who carried himself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult situations. Dr. Wright was exactly what Cole would have expected from a mission doctor, competent, discreet, and focused entirely on the medical aspects of his patient's condition. "Good morning," Dr. Wright said, setting his medical bag on the room's small table. "Miss Morrison has explained that you've been suffering from an infected wound. Let's have a look and see what we're dealing with." Cole watched as the doctor examined Dutch's shoulder with professional efficiency. Dr. Wright asked practical questions about the nature of the injury and the timeline of symptoms, but he showed no curiosity about how Dutch had come to be shot, or why he was avoiding conventional medical care. "The infection is serious but treatable," Dr. Wright announced after his examination. "I'll need to clean the wound thoroughly and start you on a course of medication." "Miss Morrison, I understand. You'll be assisting with his care?" "Yes, doctor." "Good. Infected wounds require consistent attention, and it's helpful to have someone reliable managing the patient's recovery." As Dr. Wright began treating Dutch's wound, Cole found himself studying Emily's face. She watched the medical procedure with calm attention, occasionally handing the doctor instruments or supplies without being asked. There was something almost surreal about seeing his refined Eastern partner assisting with the treatment of his Outlaw associate's gunshot wound. But Emily handled the situation as if she dealt with such things every day. "There," Dr. Wright said finally, securing fresh bandages around Dutch's shoulder. "I'll return tomorrow to check on your progress. In the meantime, you need rest, clean water, and regular doses of this medication." He handed Emily a small bottle of pills, one every 4 hours, and make sure he drinks plenty of fluids. After the doctor left, Dutch looked at Emily with something approaching respect. "That was well done, Miss Morrison." Dr. Wright asked no awkward questions and provided exactly the help we needed. "As I said, respectability can be a useful tool when properly applied." Cole realized that their partnership had just passed its first real test. Emily had demonstrated that she could navigate complex situations with grace and intelligence, and she'd done it while helping them solve a problem that could have gotten them all arrested or killed. "So what's next?" Dutch asked, already looking better than he had since the Phoenix job. Emily consulted her portfolio again. "While we're waiting for Mr. Carmichael to recover, I suggest we explore some of the legitimate opportunities available. In Tucson, I've identified several businesses that might benefit from my services, which would establish my presence in town and provide us with information about local conditions." "What kind of businesses?" Cole asked. "A freight company that handles shipments throughout the territory, a mining concern that deals with investors back east, and a cattle buyer who apparently struggles with correspondence. All of them would benefit from having someone who can write professional letters and manage financial records." Cole felt a familiar wariness. "Emily, working for legitimate businesses means background checks, references, questions about your past." Emily smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, the expression was slightly predatory. Mr. Brennan, one of the advantages of having received a proper education is that I know how to create convincing documentation when necessary. By tomorrow morning, I'll have letters of reference from 3 prominent Philadelphia businesses, all of whom will speak highly of my character and capabilities." Dutch started laughing, despite the pain it clearly caused his wounded shoulder. "Cole, I think your proper Eastern lady might be more dangerous than both of us put together." As Cole looked at Emily Morrison, perfectly dressed, impeccably mannered, and calmly discussing document forgery as if it were a normal business practice, he realized that Dutch might be absolutely right. 3 days after Dr. Wright's visit, Emily Morrison had transformed herself into Miss Catherine Morrison, recently arrived from Philadelphia with impeccable credentials and a burning desire to contribute to the growth of Arizona territory. Cole watched from across the street as she emerged from Hutchinson Freight Company, her leather portfolio tucked under her arm and a satisfied expression on her face that suggested another successful interview. The speed of a satisfied expression and a satisfied expression on her face that suggested another successful interview. The speed of Emily's transformation had been breathtaking to witness. Using materials purchased from the general store and a careful study of legitimate business correspondence she'd observed in hotel lobbies, Emily had crafted a complete professional identity. Her forged letters of reference were masterpieces of subtle persuasion, filled with specific details that made them ring true and written in 3 different hands that suggested authentic correspondence from separate sources. But it wasn't just the documents that impressed Cole. It was Emily's complete embodiment of her new persona. When she walked into a business office, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. Her speech patterns shifted subtly depending on her audience, becoming more formal with bank officials and warmer with shopkeepers. She had an intuitive understanding of what each person wanted to hear and the ability to present herself as exactly the kind of person they needed. "How did it go?" Cole asked when Emily joined him at a small cafe near the freight office. "Mr. Hutchinson has offered me a position managing his correspondence with Eastern suppliers," Emily said, settling into her chair with obvious satisfaction. "The pay is modest, but it includes access to shipping schedules, cargo manifests, and detailed information about valuable shipments moving through the territory." Cole felt a chill of recognition. Emily wasn't just seeking legitimate employment. She was positioning herself to gather intelligence that could be invaluable to their criminal enterprise. "Emily, you realize what you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that information is the most valuable commodity in any business, legitimate or otherwise." Emily opened her portfolio and pulled out a sheet of notes. "For instance, I learned today that a silver mine near Tombstone is shipping a large consignment next week. The cargo will be traveling on a freight wagon with minimal security because they believe the route is secret. That's the kind of information that gets people killed." Emily's green eyes met his steadily. "Only if they're careless with how they use it. I'm not proposing that we rob every shipment I learn about, Cole, but having advanced knowledge of valuable targets gives us options we wouldn't have otherwise." Cole studied Emily's face, looking for signs of the naive Eastern lady he'd met at the train station. Instead, he saw someone who had adapted to criminal thinking with disturbing ease. "You're talking about using your legitimate position to set up robberies. That makes you an accessory to whatever crimes we commit." "I'm talking about survival," Emily replied calmly. "My legitimate position pays $12 a week, which isn't enough to support myself long term. But if that position occasionally provides information that helps our partnership succeed, then I can contribute to our mutual prosperity while maintaining a respectable facade." The logical coldness of Emily's reasoning reminded Cole uncomfortably of conversations he'd had with more experienced criminals. She was thinking like an outlaw, calculating risks and benefits, compartmentalizing moral concerns, focusing on practical outcomes rather than ethical implications. There's something else, Emily continued, lowering her voice. While I was at Hutchinson's office, I overheard a conversation about a Wells Fargo shipment that's been delayed. Apparently, there's been some concern about road agents in the area, so they're holding the cargo until they can arrange for additional guards. Cole's attention sharpened. Wells Fargo shipments typically contained payrolls for mining operations, or army posts, exactly the kind of high-value targets that made the risks of robbery worthwhile. What kind of timeline are we talking about? The shipment is scheduled to leave Tucson in 5 days, traveling north toward Flagstaff. They're planning to use a heavily guarded coach with outriders, but the route is still predictable. Cole found himself automatically calculating the logistics of such a job, the number of guards, the best places for an ambush, the escape routes through the desert terrain. It was exactly the kind of thinking that had kept him alive in his criminal career. But he was disturbed to realize that Emily was following the same mental process. "Emily," Cole said carefully, "I need you to understand something. Planning a robbery against Wells Fargo isn't like the small jobs Dutch and I usually handle. They have resources, connections with law enforcement, and a reputation for hunting down anyone who crosses them. If we take on that kind of target, there's no going back to small-time cattle rustling and bank jobs." "I understand the risks," Emily said, "but I also understand the potential rewards. One successful job against a target like that could provide enough money for all of us to disappear for months, maybe long enough to plan our next moves carefully instead of just reacting to immediate needs." Cole realized that Emily had been thinking far beyond their current situation. While he and Dutch lived job to job, she was already planning for a future that included strategic thinking and long-term security. It was the kind of criminal sophistication that took most outlaws years to develop, but Emily seemed to have grasped it instinctively. "We should discuss this with Dutch," Cole said finally. "He's the one with experience in planning complex jobs." They found Dutch sitting up in bed at the boarding house, looking considerably better than he had 3 days earlier. Dr. Wright's treatment had broken the fever, and Dutch's natural toughness was doing the rest. He listened to Emily's intelligence, gathering with growing interest, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed his own expertise in evaluating criminal opportunities. "Wells Fargo is serious business," Dutch said when Emily finished her report. "They don't just carry money, they carry the kind of money that makes it worth hiring professional gunmen to get it back. Which is exactly why they won't expect anyone to be bold enough to attempt it," Emily replied. "Most road agents avoid Wells Fargo shipments for precisely the reasons you're describing. That creates an opportunity for someone willing to take calculated risks." Dutch looked at Cole with raised eyebrows. "Your lady friend has a point. Sometimes the best targets are the ones everyone else is too scared to touch." "It's not just about courage," Emily continued, warming to her subject. "It's about information and planning. Most robberies fail because the criminals don't know enough about their targets or because they react impulsively instead of thinking strategically." Cole watched Emily outline her thoughts on proper robbery planning and realized that she wasn't just adapting to criminal thinking. She was improving on it. Her educated mind was applying business principles to criminal enterprise, treating robbery as a complex logistical problem that could be solved through careful analysis and preparation. "All right," Cole said finally. "Let's say we seriously consider this Wells Fargo job. What would you need to know to plan it properly?" Emily consulted her notes again. "I need detailed information about the coach's schedule, the exact route it will take, the number and quality of guards, and the specific contents of the shipment. I also need to understand the local law enforcement response capabilities and identify the best escape routes through terrain that favors us rather than any pursuing posses." "And how exactly do you plan to gather all this information?" Emily smiled, and Cole saw a hint of the predatory intelligence that she'd been hiding beneath her respectable facade. The same way I learned about the shipment in the first place, by being exactly where people expect to see a harmless, helpful young lady who's simply doing her job. Over the next 2 days, Cole watched Emily execute an intelligence-gathering operation that would have impressed veteran criminals. She visited businesses throughout Tucson, ostensibly seeking additional employment opportunities, but actually mapping the town's connections to transportation, banking, and law enforcement. She attended a church social where she charmed information out of a sheriff's deputy's wife. She volunteered to help with correspondence at the Army post, gaining access to military scheduling information that revealed when patrols would be in different areas. Most impressively, Emily cultivated a friendship with Martha Wells, the wife of the local Wells Fargo agent. By presenting herself as a lonely newcomer seeking female companionship, Emily gained access to social gatherings where business matters were discussed, with the casual assumption that ladies weren't interested in such masculine concerns. The shipment contains payroll for 3 mining operations, plus a special delivery of gold coins for the Flagstaff Bank, Emily reported during one of their evening planning sessions. Total value is estimated at $12,000. Dutch whistled softly. That's more money than Cole and I have seen in our entire careers combined. The coach will have 2 guards riding inside plus 4 outriders, Emily continued. But here's the interesting part. They're taking a detour through Devil's Canyon to avoid the usual route where road agents might expect them. Cole felt his pulse quicken. He knew Devil's Canyon, a narrow passage through rocky terrain that would limit the guards' mobility while providing excellent cover for an ambush. That detour might actually work in our favor. Devil's Canyon has limited escape routes for them, but plenty of hiding places for us. My thoughts exactly, Emily said. I've also learned that the local sheriff is planning to be out of town on the day of the shipment, investigating cattle rustling reports in the North County. That means any immediate pursuit would be organized by less experienced deputies. Dutch shook his head in amazement. Emily, I've been robbing stages and banks for 15 years, and I've never seen intelligence gathering like this. You've learned more about this job in 2 days than most outlaws discover after weeks of surveillance. Information is power, Emily replied simply. And power properly applied can overcome almost any obstacle. Cole realized that Emily had fundamentally changed the nature of their partnership. What had started as a desperate alliance between a struggling outlaw and a stranded Eastern lady had evolved into something much more sophisticated, a criminal enterprise that combined traditional outlaw skills with strategic intelligence and careful planning. But as he watched Emily calmly discussing the logistics of armed robbery as if she were planning a church social, Cole couldn't shake the feeling that they were crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Emily Morrison was disappearing, replaced by someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. There's one more thing, Emily said, her voice taking on a different tone. I've been thinking about what happens after we complete this job successfully. What do you mean? Cole asked. I mean that $12,000 represents more than immediate wealth. It represents the capital necessary to move beyond simple robbery and into more sophisticated criminal enterprises. With that kind of money, we could invest in businesses that would provide cover for our activities, establish connections with corrupt officials, maybe even move into areas like arms dealing or smuggling. Dutch stared at Emily with something approaching awe. Lady, you're not just talking about one robbery. You're talking about building a criminal empire. Emily's smile was both innocent and terrifying. I'm talking about using our minds as well as our guns, Dutch. I'm talking about becoming the kind of criminals that law enforcement fears rather than just pursues. Cole felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert evening air. Emily Morrison had found her calling, and it wasn't in teaching piano or managing correspondence for freight companies. She had discovered that she possessed a natural genius for criminal enterprise, and she was embracing that discovery with the same determination she'd once applied to her education. As they finalized their plans for the Wells Fargo robbery, Cole wondered if he'd rescued Emily from a predator at the train station only to help her become something far more dangerous than anything that man could have imagined. But as he looked at her face in the lamplight, intelligent, confident, and utterly committed to their success, Cole realized that he was already too far gone to care about the moral implications. Emily Morrison was teaching him to love again, but she was also teaching him to dream, bigger than he'd ever dared before. And for a man who'd spent his entire adult life just trying to survive one more day, the possibility of actually building something lasting was worth almost any risk. The morning of the Wells Fargo robbery dawned clear and cold, with the kind of crystalline desert air that made distances deceptive and sounds carry for miles. Cole checked his weapons for the third time while Emily made final adjustments to her disguise, a simple riding outfit that could pass for either a ranch woman's working clothes or a man's gear in poor light. Dutch sat his horse with the easy confidence of someone whose shoulder had healed enough for action, though Cole could see the careful way he held his left arm. "Remember," Emily said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting, "the key to this entire operation is timing. The coach will enter Devil's Canyon at approximately 10:30. We need to be in position by 10:15, but not so early that we're spotted by any advance scouts." Cole nodded, though part of him still couldn't quite believe they were taking orders from a woman who'd been crying on a train platform less than 2 weeks ago. Emily's transformation had been so complete that sometimes he wondered if the helpless Eastern lady had been an act from the beginning. But then he'd catch a glimpse of vulnerability in her eyes, a moment when the careful mask slipped, and he'd remember that everyone changed when survival was at stake. They'd spent 3 days scouting Devil's Canyon, memorizing every rock formation and escape route. Emily had insisted on understanding the terrain personally rather than relying on Dutch's previous knowledge, and Cole had to admit her thoroughness had revealed advantages they might have missed otherwise. She'd identified a network of small arroyos that would allow them to disappear in 3 different directions if the robbery went wrong, and she'd cached supplies at strategic points along each escape route. "The weather's in our favor," Dutch observed, studying the clear sky. "No chance of rain turning the canyon floor muddy, and visibility is good enough that we won't miss our targets, but not so clear that they'll spot us too early." Emily consulted a pocket watch that had belonged to her father, one of the few personal items she'd managed to keep through all her losses. "We should move into position now. Mr. Hutchinson mentioned yesterday that the coach left the depot precisely on schedule." As they rode toward Devil's Canyon, Cole found himself studying Emily's profile. She sat her borrowed horse with competence. That suggested riding lessons in her genteel Philadelphia past, but there was nothing genteel about the intensity in her eyes as she reviewed their plan one final time. She'd insisted on carrying a pistol, and though Cole had tried to discourage her, he'd been forced to admit that her marksmanship was adequate for their purposes. The canyon entrance yawned before them like a mouth full of broken teeth, red sandstone. Walls rose on either side, carved by centuries of flash floods into twisted spires and hidden alcoves. The floor was littered with boulders that had fallen from the heights, creating natural barriers and hiding places. It was perfect ambush country if you knew how to use it. "Positions," Emily said quietly, and Cole felt a moment of surreal amazement. That he was following tactical instructions from a woman who'd probably never seen violence before meeting him. They'd rehearsed this dozens of times over the past 3 days. Emily would conceal herself behind a boulder formation about 50 yards up the canyon, positioned to block the coach's retreat while staying out of the initial crossfire. Dutch would take the high ground on the left side, where his rifle skills could control the canyon mouth. Cole would position himself for the direct confrontation, emerging from cover to demand surrender once the coach was trapped. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, but Cole knew that no plan survived contact with reality unchanged. The key was maintaining flexibility while sticking to the core strategy Emily had designed. At exactly 10:20, they heard the distant sound of wheels and hoofbeats echoing off the canyon walls. Emily raised her hand in a signal they'd practiced, and Cole felt his pulse quicken with the familiar mixture of fear and excitement that preceded action. The Wells Fargo coach appeared around a bend in the canyon, moving at a steady pace that suggested confidence in their route's secrecy. Cole counted guards exactly as Emily had predicted, 2 men riding inside with the driver, 4 outriders spread in a protective formation. The horses were fresh and the men looked alert, but there was no sign they suspected trouble. Cole waited until the coach reached the predetermined point, then spurred his horse out of concealment with his bandana pulled up over his face. "Wells Fargo, stop where you are and throw down your weapons." The reaction was immediate and violent. The outriders reached for their guns while the driver whipped his horses in an attempt to crash through the ambush. Dutch's rifle cracked from the high ground, dropping the lead outrider from his saddle, while Cole's pistol barked at the guards inside the coach. But something was wrong. Instead of the confused scramble Emily had predicted, the guards responded with military precision. That suggested they'd been expecting trouble. One of the inside guards produced a shotgun and laid down covering fire while the others maneuvered to better positions. "It's a trap!" Dutch shouted from his perch. "They knew we were coming." Cole's blood turned to ice as he realized the implications. Someone had betrayed them, someone who knew their exact plan and timing. His first thought was Emily, but she was exactly where she was supposed to be, laying down suppressing fire that kept the coach from retreating. Then he saw them. Additional riders emerging from concealment further up the canyon, not guards or deputies, but men in dark clothes with the coordinated movements of professionals, bounty hunters or Pinkertons, maybe both. "Emily!" Cole shouted. "Get out of there! It's an ambush!" But Emily was already moving, abandoning her position to race toward Cole's location. Her horse stumbled on the rocky ground, throwing her hard against a boulder. Cole saw her try to rise, saw blood on her forehead, saw her reaching for her dropped pistol as armed men closed in on her position. Everything slowed down to crystal clarity. Cole could see the trap closing around them, could calculate the odds of escape, could recognize that their carefully planned robbery had become a fight for survival. But all of that mattered less than the sight of Emily in danger. Cole charged toward her position, his gun blazing at the closing riders. He heard Dutch's rifle providing cover fire from above, heard the whistle of bullets passing close to his head, heard his own voice shouting Emily's name above the gunfire. Emily managed to reach her pistol and got off 2 shots before a bounty hunter's rope settled around her shoulders. Cole's next shot took the man from his saddle, but there were too many of them, closing in from too many directions. "Cole," Emily called out. "The southeast arroyo. Take Dutch and go." "Not without you." "Go." "That's an order." Cole realized that Emily was right. Their only chance was to escape separately and regroup later. But the thought of leaving her behind, of abandoning the woman who'd become his partner and so much more, made him hesitate just long enough for a rifle bullet to crease his shoulder. Dutch appeared beside him, his horse lathered and his face grim. "Cole, we have to move now. Emily's right, we can't help her if we're dead or captured." Cole looked back at Emily one more time and saw her signal frantically for them to escape. Her face was bloody but determined, and in her eyes he saw not fear but calculation. Even in the middle of a gunfight, Emily Morrison was still thinking strategically. "I'll come back for you," Cole shouted, then spurred his horse toward the escape route Emily had identified. The ride through the arroyo system was a nightmare of pursuit and evasion. Cole and Dutch used every trick they'd learned in years of outlaw life, changing directions, creating false trails, pushing their horses to the edge of collapse. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of organized pursuit, too organized, too professional to be local law enforcement. Who the hell were those men? Dutch gasped when they finally stopped to rest in a hidden canyon miles from Devil's Canyon. Cole was wondering the same thing. The ambush had been too perfect, too well coordinated to be accidental. Someone had known their exact plan, their timing, even their escape routes. But who? I don't know, Cole said, though suspicions were already forming in his mind. But we're going to find out, and we're going to get Emily back. Dutch studied Cole's face with concern. Cole, you need to think about this clearly. That wasn't just a failed robbery, that was a professional operation designed to capture us. Emily might already be dead, and going back could be suicide. Emily's alive, Cole said with certainty he couldn't explain. And she's counting on you is to figure out what went wrong. As they made camp in the hidden canyon, Cole found himself replaying every detail of the past 2 weeks. Emily's sudden appearance in his life, her immediate adaptation to criminal thinking, her sophisticated planning abilities, it all seemed too convenient now, too perfect. But then he remembered the tears on her face at the train station, the genuine fear when she'd learned about her uncle's death, the way she'd looked at him when she'd said she was falling in love with an outlaw's life. Those emotions had been real, he was certain of it, which meant the betrayal had come from somewhere else. Dutch, Cole said suddenly, who else knew about our plans? Nobody, we were careful about that. Think harder. Emily gathered information from a lot of sources. Someone might have put the pieces together. Dutch was quiet for a long moment. Well, there's Dr. Wright. He knew we were outlaws, knew we were planning something. And there's Rosa at the boarding house. She heard enough conversations to figure things out. Cole felt a chill of realization. Or someone was watching Emily all along. Someone who let her gather intelligence because they wanted to know what we were planning. You think she was bait in a trap? I think someone used her to get to us, Cole said grimly. Which means she's in just as much danger as we are. As night fell over the Arizona desert, Cole stared up at the stars and made a promise to himself. He would find Emily Morrison, he would discover who had betrayed them, and he would make sure that both he and Emily survived to see justice done. Because somewhere in the past 2 weeks, between the train station and Devil's Canyon, Cole Brennan had fallen completely in love with the Eastern lady who'd taught him to dream of something better than just survival. And love, Cole was learning, made a man capable of things he'd never imagined possible, both wonderful and terrible things that would define the rest of his life. Emily had taught him that the heart could be just as dangerous as any weapon, and twice as powerful when properly aimed. Now, all he had to do was stay alive long enough to use that knowledge to save the woman who'd saved him first. 3 days after the Devil's Canyon disaster, Cole and Dutch sat in the ruins of an abandoned mine shaft 20 miles north of Tucson, subsisting on jerky and water while they planned their next move. Cole's shoulder wound had been cleaned and bandaged, but Dutch's expertise with field medicine couldn't touch the deeper injury, the gnawing certainty that Emily was in mortal danger while he hid in the desert like a coward. You're going to get yourself killed, Dutch said for the 3rd time that morning, watching Cole clean his pistol with obsessive attention to detail. And probably me along with you. Then right away, Cole replied without looking up. Nobody's asking you to stay. Dutch snorted. After 15 years of partnership? Cole, I may be a lot of things, but I ain't the kind of man who abandons his friends when things get rough. Cole finally met his partner's eyes, seeing genuine concern there along with the frustration. Then help me figure out how to get Emily back. What makes you so sure she's still alive? Professional bounty hunters don't usually take prisoners unless there's a specific reason. The question Cole had been avoiding forced its way to the surface. Why would bounty hunters keep Emily alive? The most logical explanations were all variations of the same terrible theme. They wanted information about Cole and Dutch's other activities, or they planned to use her as bait for another trap. Because whoever set this up knows that Emily Matters to me, Cole said finally. They kept her alive because they know I'll come for her. Which is exactly why you shouldn't, Dutch pointed out. It's the most obvious trap in the world. Cole holstered his cleaned pistol and stood up, pacing. The small confines of their hideout. Maybe, but Emily saved my life at that train station. Dutch, not just from immediate danger, but from becoming the kind of man who stops caring about anything but survival. I can't abandon her now. Dutch studied his partner's face, recognizing something he'd never seen there before. You're in love with her. It wasn't a question, and Cole didn't try to deny it. Yeah, I am. Does she know? I never told her directly. But smart as she is, she probably figured it out. Dutch was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the desert landscape that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. You know, in all the years we've been partners, I've never seen you let anyone get close enough to matter. What makes Emily different? Cole considered the question, trying to put into words something he barely understood himself. She sees me, Dutch. Not the reputation, not the wanted posters, not the things I've done. She sees who I could be. And somehow, when I'm with her, I start to see it too. That's dangerous thinking for a man in our line of work. Maybe, but Emily taught me that there are worse things than dying. Living without hope is one of them. Dutch nodded slowly, recognition dawning in his weathered features. All right then. If we're going to mount a rescue operation against professional bounty hunters, we'd better do it smart. Tell me what you know about who took her. Cole pulled out a piece of paper where he'd been making notes about the ambush. The men in Devil's Canyon weren't local law enforcement. They moved like military, had better equipment than most sheriffs could afford, and they knew our plan in too much detail for coincidence. Pinkertons? Maybe. Or private bounty hunters working for someone with serious money. The question is, who has that kind of resources and a specific interest in our activities? Dutch frowned. We've never hit targets big enough to attract that level of attention. Our biggest score before this was maybe $800 from that bank in Albuquerque. Which means this isn't about past crimes, Cole realized. Someone wanted to stop us from hitting that Wells Fargo shipment specifically. The question is why? Cole's mind raced through the possibilities. The shipment had contained mining payrolls and bank deposits valuable, but not irreplaceable. Unless there had been something else in that coach, something worth hiring professional kidnappers to protect. Emily gathered all her intelligence from legitimate sources, Cole said suddenly. She talked to Martha Wells, the agent's wife. She visited businesses, attended social functions, made friends with half the town. What if someone was feeding her information deliberately? You mean what if the whole thing was a setup from the beginning? Cole felt pieces clicking into place with terrible clarity. Emily said the Wells Fargo agent's wife was unusually friendly, unusually willing to share details about her husband's business. What if Martha Wells was working with whoever set this trap? Dutch whistled softly. That would mean they've been planning this for weeks, maybe since Emily first arrived in town. The implications were staggering. If Cole was right, then Emily's entire integration into Tucson society had been carefully managed by people who wanted to manipulate her into providing intelligence about outlaw activities. But that raised even more disturbing questions about Emily's fate. If they've been watching Emily since she got to town, Cole said slowly, then they know she's not just another outlaw. They know she's educated, intelligent, capable of long-term planning. Someone like that would be valuable alive. Valuable for what? Cole didn't want to voice his suspicions, but the logic was inescapable. For recruiting. Think about it, Dutch Emily. Proved she could gather intelligence, plan operations, and adapt to criminal thinking faster than anyone we've ever met. If someone wanted to build a more sophisticated criminal organization, she'd be the perfect person to help them do it. The thought of Emily being forced to use her considerable talents in service of someone else's criminal empire made Cole's blood run cold. But it also gave him hope If Emily was valuable to their enemies, she was more likely to be alive and relatively unharmed. So where would they take her? Dutch asked. Can't be anywhere too public if they're trying to recruit her into criminal activity. Cole spread out a rough map of the territory, marking the locations they'd scouted over the past months. Somewhere isolated but not too far from civilization. They'd need supplies, communication with outside contacts, maybe a place where they could operate without attracting attention from local law enforcement. Dutch studied the map, his finger tracing possible routes. What about the old mining camps? Some of those places are practically ghost towns now, but they still have buildings, water sources, and they're remote enough for privacy. That's a start. But we need more than guesswork if we're going to find Emily before ... double quotes. Cole couldn't finish the sentence. Before what? Before she decides that working with them is better than trying to escape. Emily's practical, Dutch. If someone offers her security and the chance to use her skills, she might take it rather than risk dying in a rescue attempt that might never come. Dutch looked shocked. You think Emily would betray us? I think Emily would survive, Cole said grimly. And I can't blame her for that, because survival is what I taught her to value above everything else. The realization hit Cole like a physical blow. In teaching Emily to think like an outlaw, he'd also taught her that loyalty was a luxury and survival was paramount. If their positions were reversed, he might make the same choice she was facing now. But that didn't mean he was going to let it happen without a fight. We need information, Cole said, studying the map with renewed focus. And I know where to get it. Where? From the person who probably helped set this trap in the first place. Martha Wells. Dutch looked skeptical. Cole, walking into town, is suicide. They'll be watching for us. Not if we do it right. Tonight is Saturday, there's always a social at the church, and Martha Wells never misses a chance to be the center of attention. If we time it correctly, we can get to her when she's alone. And then what? You think she's just going to confess to being part of a conspiracy? Cole's smile was cold and without humor. Dutch, I've spent the last 10 years learning how to make people tell me things they don't want to share. Martha Wells is going to tell me everything she knows about who took Emily and where they went. As they prepared for their return to Tucson, Cole found himself thinking about Emily's transformation. From helpless victim to criminal mastermind. She'd adapted to their world with startling speed, but she'd also retained something he'd lost years ago, the ability to care about more than just immediate survival. Emily had taught him that love wasn't weakness, that hope wasn't naivety, and that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds were impossible. Now it was time to put those lessons to the test. Cole, Dutch said as they saddled their horses for the ride back to town. What if Emily is already working with whoever took her? What if she's trying to survive by cooperating with them? Cole considered the question seriously. Then I'll still try to get her back. But I'll also make sure she knows that she has other choices. And if she doesn't want to come back, if she's found something that offers her more security than our partnership can provide. Cole mounted his horse and adjusted his hat against the setting sun. Then I'll make sure she's safe and happy, even if it means walking away from the best thing that ever happened to me. As they rode toward Tucson through the gathering darkness, Cole reflected on how much he'd changed since meeting Emily Morrison at that train station. The man who'd watched her crying on that platform had been focused entirely on his own survival, suspicious of emotional attachments, and convinced that caring about other people was a form of weakness. But Emily had shown him that love wasn't about possession or control. It was about wanting someone else's happiness, even when it conflicted with your own desires. She'd taught him that true strength came from being willing to sacrifice for others, not from avoiding all emotional risks. Now, as he prepared to risk everything to save the woman who'd saved him first, Cole Brennan understood what Emily Morrison had been trying to teach him all along. Love wasn't just about finding someone worth dying for. It was about finding someone worth living for. Someone who made you want to become better than you'd ever imagined possible. And whether Emily chose to come back to their partnership or build a new life with someone else, Cole was determined to give her that choice freely made rather than forced by circumstances beyond her control. The night ahead would test everything Emily had taught him about courage, loyalty, and the transformative power of genuine love. Cole only hoped he'd learned her lessons well enough to save them both. The church social was in full swing when Cole and Dutch reached the outskirts of Tucson, using the darkness and the sound of hymns to mask their approach. Cole had spent the afternoon transforming his appearance clean-shaven for the first time in months, hair slicked back, wearing clothes they'd borrowed from a line behind the boarding house. In the lamplight spilling from the church windows, he looked like a traveling businessman rather than a wanted outlaw. Dutch remained with the horses in a grove of cottonwoods near the creek, positioned to provide covering fire if their infiltration went wrong. "You sure about this?" he'd asked one final time as Cole prepared to enter the social. "No," Cole had admitted. "But it's the only play we have." Now standing in the shadows outside the white-painted church, Cole watched through the windows as Tucson's respectable citizens mingled over punch and cake. He spotted Martha Wells immediately, a plump woman in her 40s with elaborately styled hair and a dress that probably cost more than most people in the territory earned in a month. She held court near the refreshment table, surrounded by other ladies who hung on her every word. Cole studied the crowd, identifying potential threats and escape routes with the automatic caution of a man who'd survived this long by never relaxing. His guard. He recognized several faces from his previous time in town: shopkeepers, the bank manager, wives of prominent ranchers. All people who might recognize him if they looked too closely. But Emily had taught him something about camouflage that went beyond simple disguise. She'd shown him that people saw what they expected to see, and nobody at a church social expected to encounter dangerous criminals. If he acted like he belonged, if he projected the right combination of confidence and respectability, he could move through this crowd invisible in plain sight. Cole entered through the side door, adopting the slightly hesitant manner of someone who was new to town and uncertain about local customs. He helped himself to a cup of punch and positioned himself where he could observe Martha Wells while appearing to study the displays of quilts and preserves that decorated the church hall. "I don't believe we've met," a voice said beside him. Cole turned to find an elderly woman with kind eyes and a curious expression. "I'm Mrs. Patterson. Are you new to our community?" "James Crawford," Cole said, using the alias he'd prepared. "I'm a cattle buyer, passing through on business. Heard there was good fellowship to be found here on Saturday evenings." Mrs. Patterson beamed at this evidence of proper Christian sentiment. "How wonderful. You must meet our other newcomers. We've had such an influx of interesting people recently." She glanced around the room. "Though I'm afraid poor Emily Morrison couldn't join us tonight. Such a sweet girl, but she's been under the weather since that terrible incident earlier this week." Cole's pulse quickened. "Incident? Oh, it was dreadful. Apparently she was riding with some friends when they encountered road agents. The poor dear was quite shaken, I'm told. Martha Wells has been looking after her. Such a Christian thing to do." Cole fought to keep his expression neutral as pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Someone had created a cover story for Emily's disappearance, something that would explain her absence without arousing suspicion. And Martha Wells was apparently central to maintaining that fiction. "How terrible," Cole said with appropriate concern. "I hope the young lady recovers quickly. These frontier roads can be so dangerous." "Indeed they can. But Emily is in excellent hands. Martha has connections throughout the territory, her husband's business, you know. If anyone can ensure proper care for our Emily, it's Martha." Cole excused himself from Mrs. Patterson's company and moved closer to where Martha Wells was regaling her audience with gossip about various townspeople. Up close, he could see the calculation behind her sociable facade, the way her eyes constantly evaluated her listeners, the careful way she steered conversations toward topics that interested her. "Such a shame about that robbery attempt," Martha was saying to her circle of friends. "Though I suppose we should be grateful that the authorities were prepared. My husband says the territorial government has been tracking those particular criminals for months." One of the other women leaned forward conspiratorially. "Is it true that they captured one of the gang members?" Martha's smile held a hint of satisfaction that chilled Cole's blood. "I couldn't say for certain, of course. My husband doesn't share the details of such unpleasant business with me. But I do know that justice will be served." Cole realized he was listening to a performance carefully crafted to support whatever story had been constructed around Emily's disappearance. Martha Wells wasn't just complicit in the conspiracy. She was actively maintaining the deception that would prevent anyone from asking uncomfortable questions. As the evening progressed, Cole worked his way around the room, gathering fragments of information from casual conversations. Emily's absence was being explained as recuperation from shock after witnessing criminal activity. Questions about her exact whereabouts were deflected with vague references to private care and delicate constitution. Anyone who pressed for specifics was told that Martha Wells was coordinating Emily's recovery and would share updates when appropriate. It was a masterful piece of social manipulation, Cole had to admit. Emily's disappearance was hidden in plain sight, explained in terms that encouraged sympathy rather than suspicion while discouraging detailed inquiry. Someone with considerable experience in managing public perception had crafted this deception. Cole was beginning to suspect that the conspiracy surrounding Emily's kidnapping was larger and more sophisticated than he'd initially realized. This wasn't just about stopping one robbery or capturing two outlaws. This was about something that required careful management of multiple moving pieces across an extended timeline. As the social began winding down, Cole positioned himself near the door where departing guests thanked their hosts and made polite conversation about the evening's entertainment. He watched Martha Wells accept compliments on the refreshments and promise updates on poor Emily's condition with the practiced ease of someone who had been managing such conversations for days. When Martha finally stepped outside to bid farewell to the last guests, Cole followed at a discreet distance. She walked alone toward the better part of town, her substantial figure moving with surprising grace through the moonlit streets. Cole shadowed her carefully, using the skills he'd learned in years of nocturnal criminal activity. Martha Wells lived in a large house near the center of town, surrounded by a white picket fence and well-tended gardens. Cole watched from across the street as she climbed the front steps and disappeared inside. Lights appeared in several windows, suggesting she was settling in for the evening. Cole circled the house carefully, noting the layout and identifying potential points of entry. The back door opened onto a kitchen garden, and there was a window that appeared to access a sitting room or parlor. More importantly, he could see that Martha was alone, no husband, no servants, no guards to complicate his approach. He waited until the house had been dark for an hour before making his move. The back door lock yielded to techniques Dutch had taught him years ago, and Cole slipped inside with the silent efficiency of a professional. The house smelled of lavender and furniture polish, with the kind of comfortable prosperity that came from steady income and careful management. Cole made his way through the kitchen and into the main part of the house, guided by memory of the light patterns he'd observed from outside. Martha Wells' bedroom was on the second floor, and Cole climbed the stairs with infinite care, testing each step before committing his full weight. The bedroom door was partially open, and Cole could hear the slow, even breathing that indicated deep sleep. He slipped inside and positioned himself in a chair near the window, where moonlight would illuminate his face when Martha woke up. Then he waited, letting his presence gradually penetrate her subconscious until natural instinct brought her to awareness. Martha Wells opened her eyes and saw a man sitting quietly in her bedroom. Her intake of breath was sharp, but controlled, not the panicked scream Cole had half expected. "Good evening, Mrs. Wells," Cole said softly. "I apologize for the intrusion, but we need to have a conversation about Emily Morrison." Martha studied his face in the moonlight, and Cole saw recognition dawn in her eyes. "You're Cole Brennan." "I am." "And you're going to tell me where Emily is?" "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean," Martha said, though her voice carried none of the conviction her words suggested. Cole leaned forward slightly, letting her see the gun in his hand without making any threatening gestures. "Mrs. Wells, I've spent the evening listening to you explain Emily's absence to half the town. You know exactly where she is, who took her, and why. The only question is whether you're going to tell me voluntarily or whether I'm going to have to become unpleasant." Martha's composure cracked slightly, revealing the calculation beneath her social facade. "Mr. Brennan, you're making a serious mistake. Emily Morrison is no longer your concern." "That's where you're wrong. Emily is very much my concern, and I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to get her back safely, even if she doesn't want to come back." The question hit Cole like a physical blow, confirming his worst fears about Emily's situation. "What do you mean?" Martha sat up in bed, apparently deciding that direct confrontation was preferable to continued pretense. "I mean that Emily has been offered opportunities that far exceed anything you could provide. She's intelligent enough to recognize a better situation when she sees one." "What kind of opportunities?" "The kind that come from working with people who have resources, connections, and long-term vision. People who can appreciate her considerable talents without limiting them to crude criminal activities." Cole felt pieces clicking into place with terrible clarity. "You're working for someone who wants to recruit Emily, someone who set up the whole robbery as a way to capture her." Martha's smile was cold and satisfied. The robbery was simply a convenient method for separating Emily from unhealthy influences. "She's much too valuable to waste on small-time outlaws with no vision beyond their next score." "Who?" Cole demanded. "Who are you working for?" "People who understand that the territories are changing, Mr. Brennan. The days of individual outlaws and small gangs are ending. The future belongs to organizations with proper structure, adequate financing, and strategic thinking. Emily has the intelligence to be part of that future." Cole realized he was looking at something far more sophisticated than simple kidnapping. Someone was building a criminal empire and had identified Emily as a key recruitment target. The entire sequence of events from her uncle's death to the failed robbery had been orchestrated to isolate her from outside influences and demonstrate the limitations of her current situation. "Where is she?" Cole repeated, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that had ended more than one negotiation in his favor. Martha studied his face, apparently weighing her options. "Mr. Brennan, I'm going to give you some advice. Emily Morrison is no longer the helpless Eastern lady you rescued at a train station. She's become something much more dangerous and much more valuable. Walking away now might be the only way to ensure your continued survival." "That's not going to happen." "Then you're a fool," Martha said with genuine regret. "And Emily will be very disappointed to learn that the man she thought might be capable of growth and change turned out to be just another violent outlaw after all." Cole felt the barb hit home, but he refused to let Martha see his uncertainty. "Tell me where she is, Mrs. Wells. Last chance." Martha Wells looked at Cole Brennan, wanted outlaw, dangerous criminal, and man desperately in love with a woman who might be beyond saving, and made her final calculation. "The old Silver Creek mining camp," she said finally. 20 miles north of here, in the mountains. But Mr. Brennan, when you get there, you might discover that Emily Morrison has already made her choice about which future she prefers." As Cole prepared to leave, Martha added one final observation that would haunt him all the way to Silver Creek. "Love isn't always enough, Mr. Brennan, sometimes intelligence and ambition matter more than sentiment. Emily is learning that lesson. Right now. The abandoned Silver Creek mining camp clung to the mountainside like a scar against the dawn sky. Its weathered buildings and rusted equipment telling the story of dreams that had turned to dust when the silver ran out. Cole and Dutch approached through the pine forests that surrounded the camp, moving with the careful stealth of men who understood that one mistake would likely be their last dot from their position overlooking the camp. They could see signs of recent occupation horses in a makeshift corral, smoke rising from the chimney of what had once been the mining office, and most tellingly, armed guards posted at strategic points around the perimeter. This wasn't a simple hideout. It was a well-organized operation with professional security. "I count at least 8 men," Dutch whispered, studying the layout through Cole's field glasses. "Could be more inside the buildings. These aren't local. Thugs, Cole. They move like military." Cole took the glasses back and focused on the main office building where the smoke was rising. Through a window, he caught a glimpse of movement that made his heart race, a flash of auburn hair, a profile that could only belong to Emily. She was alive, but the question that had tormented him throughout the night ride to Silver Creek remained unanswered. Was she there as a prisoner or as a willing participant in whatever organization had recruited her? "There," Cole pointed to a side building that appeared to be some kind of storage facility. "If we can get inside that structure, we might be able to reach the main office without being spotted by the perimeter guards." Dutch studied the approach. Route, calculating angles and distances with the professional expertise of a man who'd survived 15 years of dangerous work. "It's risky. If they spot us before we reach Emily, we'll be trapped between the building and the guards with no way out." "I know, but it's the only chance we have." Dutch looked at his partner with an expression that mixed affection with exasperation. "Cole, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. What if Emily has chosen to stay with these people? What if she's not a prisoner, but a willing collaborator?" Cole had been wrestling with the same question since his conversation with Martha Wells. The woman he'd fallen in love with was intelligent, practical, and survival-oriented, exactly the kind of person who might recognize a better opportunity when it presented itself. But he also remembered the tears on her face at the train station, the trust in her eyes when she'd agreed to their partnership, the way she'd looked at him in quiet moments when she thought he wasn't watching. "Then I'll try to convince her to come back," Cole said finally. "And if she refuses, I'll make sure she's safe and happy, even if it means walking away from the best thing that ever happened to me." Dutch nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in his partner's voice. "All right then. Let's go get your lady back." They made their approach during the shift change of the guards, using the brief confusion to slip through the perimeter undetected. The storage building was unlocked and filled with mining equipment that provided excellent cover as they worked their way toward the main office. Through cracks in the wooden walls, Cole could hear voices from the larger building, men discussing logistics and plans with the kind of professional efficiency that confirmed his suspicions about the scope of this operation. But it was Emily's voice that stopped him cold when he finally heard it, clear and confident as she addressed someone with obvious authority. "The territorial banking system has 3 major vulnerabilities that could be exploited simultaneously. If we coordinate the timing properly, we could effectively control the flow of money throughout Arizona and New Mexico within 6 months." Cole felt his heart sink as he listened to Emily outline a criminal strategy that was breathtaking in its scope and sophistication. She wasn't being coerced or intimidated. She was actively participating in the planning of what sounded like a territorial-wide criminal enterprise. "Miss Morrison," an older man's voice replied, "your analysis confirms everything we hoped when we decided to recruit you. With your intelligence and our resources, we can build something that will make the James gang look like children playing with toys." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," Emily said, and Cole could hear the satisfaction in her voice. I believe this represents a much more mature approach to criminal enterprise than the crude robbery attempts I was previously involved with. Cole closed his eyes as Emily's words hit him like physical blows. She wasn't just cooperating with her captors, she was embracing their vision and dismissing their former partnership as inferior. The woman he loved had found something that offered her more than he ever could, and she was choosing it freely. Dutch touched Cole's shoulder, concern evident in his weathered features. Through the wall, they could hear Emily continuing her presentation about vulnerabilities in territorial financial systems, her voice animated with the kind of intellectual excitement Cole had learned to associate with her finest moments. "Cole," Dutch whispered, "maybe we should." "No," Cole interrupted quietly. "I need to see her. I need to know for certain." They worked their way around the building until they found a window that provided a clear view into what had once been the mining supervisor's office. The room had been converted into a sophisticated meeting space, with maps on the walls, documents spread across a large table, and several well-dressed men listening intently to Emily's presentation. Emily stood at the head of the table, pointing to locations on a territorial map with the confident bearing of someone who was completely in her element. She wore a dark blue dress that Cole had never seen before, expensive, tailored, the kind of clothing that spoke of resources and status. Her hair was styled in an elaborate arrangement that made her look older, more sophisticated, more dangerous. But it was the expression on her face that truly broke Cole's heart. Emily looked happy, not just content or resigned to her circumstances, but genuinely excited about the work she was doing. This wasn't a woman making the best of a bad situation. This was someone who had found her calling. The key, Emily was saying, is understanding that modern criminal enterprise requires the same strategic thinking as legitimate business. Individual robberies are inefficient and risky. But if we control the flow of information and money throughout the territory, we can generate steady income while maintaining respectability. One of the men at the table, a distinguished gentleman in his 50s who was apparently the Mr. Blackwood Emily had addressed, nodded approvingly. "Precisely why we wanted you as part of our organization, Miss Morrison. You understand that the future belongs to those who think strategically rather than tactically." Emily smiled at the compliment, and Cole realized that she had found something with these people that their partnership had never provided. Intellectual equals who appreciated her capabilities and encouraged her ambitions. Cole was preparing to withdraw, accepting that Emily had made her choice and that his presence would only complicate her new life, when something in the room changed. Emily's posture stiffened slightly, and her eyes moved toward the window where Cole was watching. For a moment, their gazes met through the glass, and Cole saw a flash of something in her expression that might have been relief. Then Emily did something that changed everything. While continuing her presentation, she began tapping out a pattern against the table with her fingers, 3 short taps, 3 long, 3 short. Morse code for SOS, the international distress signal. Cole's heart leaped as he realized that Emily's apparent cooperation was an elaborate performance. She was a prisoner, but she was playing the role of willing collaborator, so convincingly that even her captors believed she had genuinely converted to their cause. Emily caught his eye again and mouthed a single word, "Tonight." Cole nodded and withdrew from the window, his mind already racing with new possibilities. Emily hadn't betrayed their partnership. She was working from the inside, gathering intelligence and waiting for an opportunity to escape. But her situation was far more dangerous than simple captivity, because her captors trusted her enough to include her in their planning. If they discovered her deception, they would kill her without hesitation. "She's playing them," Cole whispered to Dutch as they retreated to a safe distance. "Emily's been pretending to cooperate while gathering information about their operation." Dutch looked skeptical. "Are you sure?" "Because from where I stood, she looked pretty comfortable with those criminals." "I'm sure. She signaled me SOS in Morse code." "Emily's in trouble. but she's also in position to help us bring down whatever organization these people are building. As they waited for darkness to fall, Cole and Dutch observed the camp's routine and identified the patterns that would allow them to mount a rescue operation. The guards changed shifts every 4 hours. There was a brief period after midnight when most of the buildings were unoccupied, and Emily appeared to have freedom of movement within the camp, a privilege that suggested her captors had complete confidence in her loyalty. But Cole also noticed something that chilled him to the bone. Emily wasn't just pretending to cooperate. She was actively contributing to their criminal planning with ideas that were genuinely innovative and dangerous. Her intelligence and education were being used to build something that could devastate the territorial economy and destroy countless innocent lives. Cole, Dutch said as they prepared for their rescue attempt, even if Emily is playing along for survival, she's helped these people plan crimes that will hurt a lot of innocent folks. How do you square that with your feelings for her? It was a question Cole had been avoiding, but Dutch's directness forced him to confront the moral complexity of their situation. Emily had made choices that compromised her innocence, regardless of her motivations. The woman he loved had become someone capable of planning crimes that would cause widespread suffering. I square it by remembering that Emily was forced into an impossible situation, Cole said finally, and by knowing that she's still the woman who cried for strangers at a train station, who risked her life to get medical help for you, who taught me that love was worth fighting for. And if she's changed? If being part of this organization has made her into someone different than the woman you fell in love with? Cole considered the question as he checked his weapons and prepared for what might be the most dangerous night of his life. Then I'll love whoever she's become, Dutch. That's what Emily taught me. Real love isn't about loving someone because they're perfect. It's about loving them because they're human, because they matter, because a world without them in it is a world you don't want to live in. At midnight, Cole and Dutch made their move. Using the intelligence they'd gathered about guard rotations and building layouts, they slipped through the camp's defenses and reached the main office building. Emily was waiting for them in a storage room adjacent to the meeting space, her face pale but determined in the moonlight filtering through a small window. "Cole," she whispered, throwing herself into his arms with desperate relief. "I was afraid you'd given up on me." "Never," Cole said, holding her close and breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Are you hurt?" "Did they?" "I'm fine," Emily interrupted. "But we have bigger problems than my situation. Cole, these people are planning something that will destroy the territorial economy and probably get hundreds of innocent people killed. I've been gathering information about their operation, but I need help to stop them." Cole felt a surge of pride and love for this remarkable woman who had managed to maintain her moral compass even while pretending to embrace criminal enterprise. "What do you need?" Emily pulled out a leather portfolio filled with documents and maps. "Everything they've told me about their plans, every detail I've been able to gather about their organization. This information could help the territorial authorities shut down their operation before they can implement their strategy." Dutch studied the documents by moonlight, his expression growing increasingly grim. "Emily, this is bigger than just robbery or cattle rustling. These people are planning to take control of the entire territorial government through a combination of bribery, blackmail, and economic manipulation." "I know," Emily said. "Which is why we can't just escape. We have to make sure this information reaches people who can act on it." Cole realized that Emily had evolved beyond even his highest expectations. She wasn't just surviving her captivity, she was using it as an opportunity to strike a blow against criminal enterprise that could save countless innocent lives. The woman he'd fallen in love with had become a hero, even while pretending to be a criminal. "There's one more thing," Emily said, her voice taking on a different tone. "Mr. Blackwood has offered me a permanent position in his organization. A chance to build something significant. To use my abilities in ways that could change the balance of power throughout the territories. Cole felt his heart stop. What did you tell him? Emily looked into his eyes, and Cole saw everything he needed to know in her expression. I told him I needed time to consider his offer. But Cole, I've already made my choice. I choose you. I choose us. I choose the kind of life where we build something together, based on love rather than power. Cole kissed her then, pouring all his relief and gratitude and love into that moment of connection. When they broke apart, Emily was smiling through tears that reflected the moonlight like diamonds. I love you, Cole Brennan, she whispered. You taught me that some things are worth more than security or success or even survival. You taught me that love is the only thing that really matters in the end. And you taught me that love doesn't make a man weak, Cole replied. It makes him strong enough to become better than he ever thought possible. As they prepared to escape from Silver Creek and begin a new life together, Cole reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Emily Morrison had started as a helpless victim crying at a train station, but she'd become the strongest, most courageous person he'd ever known. And somewhere along the way, she'd taught him that redemption wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about choosing to build a better future. 6 months later, Cole and Emily Brennan stood on the porch of a small ranch in Colorado Territory, watching the sun set over mountains that promised new beginnings and second chances. The information Emily had gathered at Silver Creek had led to the arrest of Mr. Blackwood and the dismantling of his criminal organization, earning them a pardon from the territorial governor and a chance to start over as law-abiding citizens. Emily taught piano to children in the nearby town while Cole worked as a deputy sheriff, using his knowledge of criminal behavior to help protect the people he'd once preyed upon. They'd found something neither had expected when they met at that train station, not just love, but purpose, meaning, and the kind of happiness that came from building a life together based on mutual respect and shared dreams out in the evenings. Emily would play piano while Cole worked on his reading and writing, skills that Emily insisted were essential for a man who wanted to build something lasting. And sometimes, when the music was particularly beautiful and the mountain air was soft with the promise of spring, Cole would remember that first night when Emily had taught him that love wasn't about possession or control, it was about wanting someone else's happiness even when it meant risking your own. Emily Morrison had found a crying outlaw at a train station and taught him to love again. But more than that, she'd taught him that love was strong enough to transform even the most hardened heart, brave enough to face any danger, and wise enough to choose hope over fear every single time. And as they watched the stars appear over their new home, Cole Brennan knew that Emily Morrison had given him the greatest gift anyone could offer, a second chance at becoming the man he was always meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.